Welcome back to the Man Cave. And as I explained to you in my last video, I'm here with my very good friend, Colin Seviour. Colin is somebody who's studied the Constitution, who understands the Magna Carta. And we're going to talk to Colin today about all of that and about the constitutional vandalism that was wrought by Tony Blair in particular and successive prime ministers in this country. We're going to talk about your rights. We're going to talk about what your birthright is, what you're entitled to as a British person. And what we're going to talk about in particular is how Advance UK is committed to re-establishing your rights and going back and undoing the constitutional vandalism that was wrought by Tony Blair in particular. So welcome to the Man Cave, Colin.
Oh, thank you very much.
Colin, tell us about the Magna Carta. Where did this originate from?
Well, the Magna Carta was created, as most of us should know, in 1215 under the reign of King John. King John was something of a naughty boy, and the barons at the time were rather fed up with the way in which he was trying to run the country, as a consequence of which he was basically tied up in a naughty room and made to seal the Magna Carta. And the Magna Carta introduced something called the rule of law. And what that basically means is that everyone, from the king down to the cleaner, is subject to the rule of the law of the land, and we are all equal under that law.
And fundamentally then, the Magna Carta became the basis of a constitution that lasted all the way through really until the time of Tony Blair, who chose to act to repeal it because it didn't meet with his personal political preferences. Can you tell us a little bit more about what came before the Magna Carta, and in particular the four rules of law that were formed, that it took from what went before?
Well, this is the sort of thing that I think everyone should have been taught in school. But in the year 887, which was a little bit before I was born, and probably you too, we had somebody called Alfred the Great. Well, he was originally just called Alfred, but he was eventually to be known as Alfred the Great because he did a number of pretty sort of wonderful things for his country. And the first thing that he did was to talk to the 10 estates, which was how the country was effectively set up at the time. And he gathered the best laws from all of them. And he collected those laws into a book called The Dome. Now, The Dome was fundamentally the basis for the common law that underpins our constitution and is the law that Magna Carta introduced as the rule of. So it's the rule of common law. Now, you might think there are millions and millions of crimes, but under the common law, there are actually only 4 categories. So the first one is the causation of alarm and distress. So you're walking along the street, you're minding your own business. I leap out in front of you and I say, give me all your money or I'm going to punch your lights out. The second one is harm and distress. Well, you didn't give me all your money, so I'm going to punch your lights out, and now I've punched your lights out and I've taken your money, and c'est la vie. The third one is to be, or not to commit fraud. So basically it's honesty in all your dealings. Now, honesty is an interesting topic because if you can find much of that going on in the Commons at the moment, I'd like to know where. But it is a fundamental human decency kind of approach. And the final one is to keep the peace. So don't riot, don't traipse through the streets smashing things up, behave in a civilized manner, which of course is what we've been trying to do in this country throughout our history.
So those 4 categories really formed common law in this country. And for all of those hundreds of years, common law ruled the British people, and every crime that took place within common law was punished within common law. What the Magna Carta established in addition to that, as I understand it, was a specific list of rights that British people had as a birthright. Perhaps you could tell us more about those rights.
Well, Magna Carta didn't actually establish the rights. The rights were actually established as part of the original work within the Dome. And I think it's a great shame that no copies of the Dome appear to have exist. We do know that it did exist because it's been referenced by a huge range of other bits and pieces. But I actually have a list here
This forms the centre of absolutely everything that's taken place not just through our history, but which we've passed on to other countries, including America, to establish democracy and rule of the law in those places too.
Well, very much so, because our constitution is the grandfather of all of those others. And the common law lies at the root of all of those as well. There is an organisation in Britain, it's called the Common Law Court of Great Britain International. You can find it at www.commonlawcourt.com, and there you can find out a lot more about how justice is designed to be implemented, and basically that will show you how it's so not implemented at the moment. It's
understood.
Somewhat up the Swanee, I think. Is
So
the
talk us through our rights as established and laid down in the Magna Carta.
So the original permanent and unalienable rights, and that word unalienable is very important, of every man or woman, or every packet of crisps, if that's how you wish to identify yourself, include, but this is not a definitive list, but they include the right to life, freedom, health, and the pursuit of happiness. You find as we go through these, they're fundamentally all based on common sense.
Yep.
The right to contract or not contract, which is unlimited.
That's a very fundamental right, and that's something that reflects heavily on modern society.
Well, it is indeed. And the other thing I think to bear in mind is that since that certain governments have instated a corporatocracy approach into our society, things like the DVLA, the HMRC, all of these what were government departments are now for-profit companies. So contract law suggests that you do not have to contract with them. But that kind of brings us back to the straw man, and that's a totally different topic of conversation. So carrying on with the list, the right to earn a living, income by being compensated with wages or salary in a fair exchange for one's work. So that's a right to earn a living. It doesn't say here you have to have a digital ID to do that.
I was going to make that specific point. The introduction of a digital ID and forcing people to have a digital ID in order to be able to work is actually a primary contravention of the rights laid down in the Magna Carta.
It's absolutely a contravention of our common law right. The right to travel in the ordinary course of one's life and business. Well, again, I think there's pretty common sense in that. Although, again, we need to understand what the difference is between travelling and driving. And I think maybe that's
I understand
a topic for conversation.
But looking at lockdowns and the ideal which is being pushed in front of us of living in a 15-minute city where you're pretty much confined in your right to travel to everything that's within 15 minutes of you, again, is a clear contravention of a fundamental common law right.
Totally unconstitutional. So, the right to privacy and confidentiality free from unwarranted invasion. Are you listening, Mr. Starmer? Just wondering.
Something you need to remember next time the TV licence man knocks on your door, or that the police come round and moan at you for something that you've written which is a non-crime hate crime.
Yes, well, of course, a crime requires a victim. If you go through the 4 categories of crime, these are all nasty things that are done to poor, undeserving people. So a lot of what are called crimes are actually offences. And they're offences, not crimes under common law. They're offences under Lex Mercantoria, which effectively is the law of the sea, law of trade, maritime law. And the attempts by government to replace common law with other forms of law, whatever they might be, are, again, acts of treason, because the Constitution says there is only one law. All right, I'm just wondering where I was. The right to own and hold property lawfully without trespass. So when that nice Mr. Schultz says no one will own anything and everyone will be happy, well, I would tend to think that's probably not a very lawful approach. The right to self-defence when threatened with harm, loss or deceit. So we are entitled to defend ourselves. We'll come to the right to bear arms a little bit later, because although that is a constitutional law, it's actually referred to in the Bill of Rights 1689, and that's an add-on. So we will arrive back at that in a minute. the right to due process of law with notice and opportunity to defend, the right to be presumed innocent, suffering no detention or arrest, no search or seizure without reasonable cause. So basically those two are sort of habeas corpus.
Yeah.
The right to remain silent when accused to avoid self-incrimination. Well, we've all seen the TV programs.
No comment.
Yeah, did you do that? No comment. The right to equality in the eyes of the law and equal representation. So we are all of us equal under the law.
That's a significant right that people seem to have forgotten over the years, and the whole equality lobbying based on race and on religion and on sex and all of the grievance that we hear throughout society actually is completely unnecessary and has been covered by our common law rights ever since the Magna Carta.
Well, it is completely unnecessary because we're all equal.
Yep.
That means if you are the Prime Minister, you are equal under the law to the rest of us.
Yep.
But if you are the Prime Minister, let's not forget that you have been elected to serve, not to dictate. So that kind of brings this into play as well. The right to trial by jury, being an impartial panel of one's peers.
This is a fundamental thing which is under review at the moment. Keir Starmer, Labour Party, are currently looking very carefully at restricting the right to jury trials. And that's something that that every concerned person in this country should be aware of and should be loudly protesting against. You have a right to jury trial in a court of your peers, and that right must not be lost.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. And then, of course, you have the right to appeal in law against conviction or sentence or both. There aren't many more, I'm pleased to say. So the right to expose knowledge necessary to one's rights and freedom. So that's basically the right to speak up.
Yep.
When you know something's going on that is detrimental to the good of the people, then you have a right to speak up.
So when politicians lay super injunctions to prevent you from telling the truth because it's personally inconvenient to them, they are actually contravening your rights as laid down under the Magna Carta and our Constitution.
Well, the thing is, if they try and impose something like that, it's up to you not to sign it.
Yes.
Bear in mind that we have the right in this country because we are policed by consent, and we have the right to withdraw that consent. So any piece of legislation which is contrary to the common law, and we'll come to Parliament in a minute, it is not good law and it should be struck down. So then you have the right to practice a religion, to have beliefs of one's choosing. That's to practice a religion, not to shove it down everyone else's throat.
Not to impose it on others and force them to...
You know, I mean, there are many religions out there. I, for years, studied the occult, which doesn't necessarily make me a black magician. But the last thing I would do is go down the pub and put a curse on everyone. And it just tends not to work that way. The right to love and to consensual marriage with children as a family. Well, obviously that's fundamental. The right to security from abuse, persecution, tyranny, and war. Abuse, persecution, tyranny. I think those are pretty important points to mention, because at the moment, anyone who puts up any political view is immediately abused by somebody. We seem in this country to have lost the art of debate.
Political discourse is vital, and it's certainly something that I'm continually raising myself. And we've seen evidence of this today, in actual fact, with Advance being forced to, or choosing to, postpone its official launch in Wales after being exposed to abuse by political opponents there.
Yes, well, I believe the opponents effectively were Reform. And I find that very saddening because I, like you, was originally a member of Reform. And I actually thought Reform were going to be the party that would throw all this treasonous acts and control by foreigners out of the window. I honestly thought they were our main hope to see all of this repealed and the Constitution fully reinstated. And sadly, it appears it's not the case. And
Well,
that's,
I think it's very much the case that reform, as it was set up by those who set it up, was committed to that sort of a thing. But unfortunately, all of that's been lost by the direction that reform has subsequently taken. And reform now talks in terms of establishing its own Bill of Rights. It doesn't recognise the Constitution. It doesn't recognise the need to go back to what we had before. It wants to replace one piece of authoritarian legislation with another piece of authoritarian legislation, rather than going back to the ancient Constitution and the Magna Carta, which served us so well throughout centuries of our history.
well, that's right. And it's not just that. At the end of the Civil War, the Glorious Revolution, in 1688, we had the Declaration of Rights, and that was under the auspices of William and Mary, who had taken over the throne at the time. In 1689, we had the Bill of Rights, and the Bill of Rights is one of those pieces of legislation which is in place for perpetuity, because it wasn't created by any parliament. It was created when the King and Queen got the 10 estates of the country together, and they said, how do you want to be governed? And they said, well, these are the rights that we have seen others attempt to take from us, and we want to make sure that they're held in place in perpetuity. And those rights, I've got a list of them here. Funnily enough, here's one I prepared earlier. The right is for subjects to be ruled by statute and common law, and not to be ruled by any arbitrary power. No man is above the law, which kind of comes back to where we were earlier, but this simply reinstates
An arbitrary power being potentially the European Union,
well, it's
or
any
the WEF, or anything else that is not British sovereign parliament.
Well, that's right. Because the British people, as I think I said, are sovereign, and they elect the parliament. And the reason we are policed by consent is the parliament always create laws that satisfy the will of the majority of the people and are lawful because the Lords have passed them and said they don't contravene the common law.
Parliament exists to serve the people, and the people hold power over Parliament, not the other way around. Parliament is not the master, Parliament is the servant.
It is indeed. And that's why when you see people saying, oh, well, they've been doing this in Europe for such a long time, that's fine. That's Europe. That's Napoleonic law. This is Britain. It isn't. So the right of the subject is that only the customary and lawfully recognised courts of the United Kingdom should exist. So again, you are allowing ECHR, foreign power, dictates to the people of this country. We did not pass the laws which they use. They are not servants of ours, and therefore allowing them to have any influence is a clear act of treason. And I'm just wondering how long after... why is it, do you think, let's rephrase that, why is it, do you think, that none of these people have been accused of high treason and been tried under the common law for it? Is it because so much has been swept under the carpet? Is it because most people don't know anything about the Constitution because it hasn't been taught since 1976? And why would you not teach the people of a country their own constitution unless you meant it harm?
I think that the answer to that is very clear, and it's conspiratorial. It's because politicians want to deny the existence of common law, they want to deny the existence of our constitution, and they want to align us with foreign methods of controlling the people and legislating against them.
Yeah, and when you consider they're elected to serve, controlling the people isn't really in their remit.
It's not how it should be.
Oh, far, absolutely. So, carrying on, the right is for no taxation without representation. Yep. Now, this could lead us into a long conversation about the broken electoral system. So we won't do that, otherwise we'll be here for the next...
I think we can make a simple point here, and that is to remind people that we have a Labour government at present which is passing legislation which wasn't even its manifesto. Last year we had a general election and fewer than 20% of those entitled to vote voted for this government. So this government is existing on has a massive majority on less than 20% of the popular vote. More than 80% of people who are entitled to vote didn't vote for it, and are finding that they are having legislation foisted upon them which didn't even feature in the manifesto of the government. It's not surprising that people are angry and getting angrier in ever larger numbers.
No, I quite agree with you. Okay, let's move on to the next one then. The right of the subject to petition the monarch without imprisonment or prosecution. So, that's probably not such an important one now. Oh, look, the personal right to armed defence. The right to bear arms gives every person the right to self-defence using reasonable force, including deadly force if appropriate. So if someone is trying to kill you and the only way to stop them is to kill them first, then I don't think it's unreasonable that that's what's going to happen. Using tragic events as an excuse to remove that right has historically been the work of governments, and I'll emphasise this, with good reason to fear their people. Governments intent on some kind of future totalitarian control of their populations. So let's just assume that you're going to run through the streets. I mean, let's go back a few years. There was a guy who went through the streets with a gun and he was just picking people off at random.
In Hungerford.
That's in Hungerford, yeah. I can't remember the fella's name.
Michael Ryan, I believe.
I believe he's probably right. You'll be editing this bit out, won't you? So, all right, we'll do it again then. So let's consider Hungerford, Michael Ryan, going through the streets with his gun and picking people off at random. If he tried to do that in Texas, he probably wouldn't shoot more than one. Am I suggesting we should all be armed to the teeth? No, I don't necessarily think we should, but I think those of us who feel the need to defend ourselves and are of sound of mind and body should not have to jump through hoops to possess a firearm.
We certainly shouldn't be living in a society where we have courts which are dealing more stringently with people who have defended themselves than with the person who has been the instigator of a violent conflict.
Yeah, well, that kind of brings us back to the punishment should fit the crime, and the right for punishment to fit the crime and there be no torture, and the right to trial by jury are two of the points in the Bill of Rights 1689.
That right to jury trial, once again, is something that we need to reiterate and re-establish because it's something that is under specific direct threat from Keir Starmer and the Labour Party right now.
Well, yeah, I mean, they'll be dragging us back to the Court of Star Chamber before you know it, and that was not much of a success, was it?
Yeah.
So the right is to have a free parliament with freedom of speech and debate, parliamentary privilege. The right to be governed according to our constitution.
Yes. We need to be very clear here that the constitution relates to England and that the Scottish have a different constitution.
It also relates to Wales.
And Wales, England and Wales.
Yeah, there was a time when the use of the word England included Wales.
Yes.
Now, the Welsh understandably weren't terribly happy about this, and as someone whose father was English and whose mother was Welsh, I have a great deal of sympathy for the Welsh view. My plan is to go and live there very shortly, and I will be trying to learn to speak some Welsh. So wish me luck with that.
Let's talk about what's happened subsequently.
Well, if we can just finish off the last four.
Right.
The last 4 points here are the presumption of innocence, no fine or forfeiture without trial and conviction.
That presumption of innocence doesn't bear scrutiny. Again, we are increasingly living, I believe, under a system where there are specific things where their presumption is more towards guilt than innocence, and that the actual process is ever more becoming the punishment.
Well, that's true. And the other thing to bear in mind, I suppose, is trial by media.
Yes.
You know, you say something on television, maybe you express a view, and the next thing you know is you've lost your job and you're guilty of offending someone somewhere. And causing offence is not a crime. It's called debate.
This is something which I feel personally very strongly about, having been exposed to that myself in my parliamentary career quite recently.
Well, there you go. It's raw. The right to have an elected parliament at all times brings us back to that word elected. What constitutes a fair electoral system? First past the post might have been when we only had two parties, and we've long been referred to as a two-party system. But of course, these days, we're not anymore. Yep. So it really is no longer fit for purpose. The rights to be held indefinitely, and they are always to be judged absolute.
Yeah, yes, I think that's very clear.
So that brings us to the list that I brought with me. As I said, these are all laid down in history. They are all still very much active and valid, and they are not definitive.
So those are your rights. That's been the case since the time of King John, and what we've seen has been a deliberate process of attempting to undermine all of that in order to replace it with rulings which bring us into line with the European Union and the way that law is undertaken in those other countries. But there was a specific article, I believe, in the Magna Carta which made it absolutely clear that no man should be able to repeal or challenge those rights without being made to face a charge of treason.
There is something in Magna Carta, certainly in the 1215 Magna Carta, and that's the one we celebrated 800 years of a couple of years ago. It's called Article 61, and it's otherwise known as the Security Clause. So these old barons, when they put this thing together, they weren't short of a trick or two, and they knew the time might come when maybe a few years, maybe a few hundred years down the line, that the system set up would be open to abuse. So Article 61, the Security Clause, it makes it unlawful to contribute to a government which is guilty of treason. You are bound to distress that government, effectively. Those are the terms used. So that was actually invoked before the revolution, before the Civil War. Before the Glorious Revolution, it was invoked, and after the revolution, we had the Bill of Rights 1689. Article 61 of Magna Carta was last invoked in the year 2001. It is in effect now. It is the right and lawful duty of all of us to stand under Article 61 and to distress any government until such time as all these acts of treason are reversed.
So when Tony Blair came along in 1997, one of the first bits of legislation that he enacted was to repel the act of treason itself. And quite clearly, you have to ask yourself the question, why would you repel the act of treason unless it was with the intention of knowingly committing treason yourself?
Well, it's not only that, but the act of treason is a constitutional component. So it can't be repealed. In the same way, you will read, if you go on the internet and you look at bits and bobs about the Magna Carta, and it will say, well, most of this was repealed anyway, so none of it's in effect anymore. Whereas anyone who has studied it, particularly those in high positions in the peerage, will tell you that it's a bit dusty, but it's all still in perfect working order. And the reason for that is, and we could never understand this when I studied it, where there was a long conversation in the class about it. In 1297, it was taken into statute. Why on earth would you take constitutional law into statute? It's constitutional law.
Yes.
But, of course, statute can be repealed.
Yeah.
But the fact that it was taken into statute and then repealed from statute doesn't mean
it doesn't disappear.
No, it doesn't. It's what I call the Mona Lisa effect. So if I travel to the Louvre, where I have to admit I've never been, and I buy myself a life-size poster of Leonardo's masterpiece, and then I go out into the into the foyer and I set fire to it. And I shriek happily, hopping from leg to leg, and say, look, I've destroyed the Magna Carta. I've destroyed the Magna Carta. How long do you think it will be before the nice young men in their clean light coats will come and carry me away? Ha ha.
Yes.
So you are destroying a copy. You are having no impact whatsoever on the original.
No, it exists come what may, and in actual fact, repealing the Constitution, repealing the Magna Carta, repealing Article 61, even if you wanted to try, you can say it, you can talk about it in Parliament, you can sign whatever documents you like, but as a human, as a man, you are not empowered to do that.
You're not, because it is constitutional, it's part of the law, we are all equal under the law, we are all bound by the law.
And that includes Tony Blair and every single Prime Minister who's come since him.
Not only that, but in spite of Blair's machinations, the law, the death penalty for treason, because it's constitutional, it still stands.
So what we're faced with here is a clear understanding that regardless of the ECHR, regardless of everything that's happened since 1997, British people still have a constitution. And that constitution has served us well since the time of King John in 1215. And there is a recognition of that in one political party now, and one political party only. And that political party is Advance UK. And that's a central pillar of what the Advance UK exists for. We understand that our priority, that our only priority, is to serve the people of this country. And the people of this country have a constitution, despite however many people may try to deny it, which has been established for all of that time, which has served perfectly well for all of that time, and has formed the basis of law, not just in this country, but in other countries all around the world, including the United States of America. It's established common law, which dates back before the Magna Carta. Tony Blair had no right to try to repeal it. Tony Blair committed an act of treason in trying. The ECHR is in actual fact irrelevant to our laws, to our common law, and to the way that our country is run. And that Advance UK recognises this. Advance UK knows that we can come out of the ECHR, that we don't need to put together a Bill of Rights as expressed by other parties, especially Reform UK, that all that we need is to go back to what has served us so well for all of those hundreds of years, which is our established constitution as laid down in the Magna Carta.
And if you would like to stand under Article 61 of Magna Carta, which I do and I am, if you go to www.commonlawassent, all one word, .com, there is all kinds of information there, including template letters, far more information about the common law than we've had a chance to talk about here. And it really is, along with the common law court, a very valuable source of information and guidance.
Colin, thank you very much for your time today. I hope that you've all enjoyed that. I hope you all might have learnt something. I urge you all to go and have a look at common law, to read more about your rights. And I urge you to remember one simple thing. There's one political party in existence now, which exists to restore the Constitution, to restore your rights under the Magna Carta, to restore British people, British sovereignty, and that party is Advance UK. Thank you, Colin.
Thank you, Malcolm.